This is a special day for the Garrett Quinn Radio Circus. We have a very special guest coming on. This is the first time I've had a presidential candidate on the show at all. Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico and the current candidate, a Libertarian candidate for president, joins us now. He's also going to be here in Boston, I think, tomorrow. He's going to be in Worcester tomorrow at the Worcester Tea Party event. Gary, thanks for coming on.
Oh, absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
I do know you're a prominent a triathlete. You climb mountains, you ride bikes, you do a lot of outdoor stuff. Are you planning on going to the Worcester Tea Party event and then just running to Hopkinton and jumping in the marathon? Because I know you like to run and.
I have done the Boston Marathon, and it really is a fabulous event. And that would be Monday, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, that would be on Monday. That's sort of when I saw that on the schedule, I thought, oh, maybe Gary Johnson's going to run the marathon, sort of, as a bandit runner, maybe. Or, as I know, they changed the requirements. I think you have to run multiple marathons now to get into it. I forget, but I did not know that you would run.
I think I've always qualified for Boston, but I've only run it one time. So when I ran it last was 2002, and as a 50-year-old, I want to say I ran 3:13.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, not bad.
Now, I know, I do know that on a more serious note, you are running for president of the United States, and you were governor of New Mexico for quite a while, and you were very popular there. I know you vetoed a gajillion bills as governor. You had a relatively high approval rating when you left. You left the state's budget was in pretty good shape. There's an open Senate seat in New Mexico. Jeff Bingaman is leaving, and why not? I'm just curious. Why didn't you run for that seat and add sort of another voice to the small but loud libertarian small government chorus in the Senate instead of running for president?
For me, I could not be in the Congress. I think that bottom line, the job is still about filling up to the trough. How much bacon can you bring home? And that's not my thing. I think that's why we're in the predicament that we're in is politicians that can't say no and are printing money to the detriment of all of us.
No, I know another former governor that was in office about the same time you were, Angus King in Maine. He's running for the open Senate seat in Maine. So I always wondering that. Did you ever consider it at all, or were you always just had your eyes on the White House?
Well, no. The object here is the message, really, and the message is that we're in terrible shape, and if we don't fix it, we're going to find ourselves with a collapsed government. So that's the message, and it's about spreading that message. I would love if Ron Paul were the Republican nominee. I don't think he's going to be the Republican nominee. So what happens to this message of fiscal conservancy and social tolerance when Ron Paul gets out of the race?
Now, in 2008, another former Republican like yourself, former Georgia Congressman Barr, he ran for president under the Libertarian banner. He had a real tough time securing the party nomination in Denver. I think he went to 5-6 ballots before he got the nomination. You are much more. It's been predicted that you'll have a much easier time securing the nomination at the convention in Las Vegas the first weekend of May. How are you different from him, and how will you fare better than him in the general election? Because he didn't do so well in the general election.
Well, first of all, I hope I'm the nominee come the first week in May. But I've arguably I got to be the Libertarian governor of New Mexico for 8 years under the guise of being a Republican. I debated Bob Barr in 2000 at the National Republican Convention in Philadelphia on drug policy. Me being, let's reform drug laws, let's legalize marijuana. Bob Barr being much different than that, and it wasn't just that topic. But you know what? He was different when it came to a lot of different topics, and I mean, from a civil liberties standpoint, he was restrictive of civil liberties.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he hit his head. I think he rolled out of bed at some point, hit his head, became a libertarian. I'm glad that happened.
He atoned for his sins.
I understand that he did a really good job of articulating what it was to be a libertarian out on the campaign trail, but you know what? He was always carrying that big old cart full of stuff that he had done in his past that weren't very libertarian. I don't have any of that stuff.
Yeah.
Arguably, I've been a libertarian my entire life.
Now, the Ed Clark remains the only libertarian presidential candidate to crack 1% in the national election. You've talked about you've polled fairly high in some states. I think it was in Florida. You were polling at 9. Do you think you can crack that? Do you think you can crack the number that the libertarians haven't been able to crack since 1980? And that would be...
the pie in the sky scenario here is to actually win the election. How does that happen? Well, polling at 15%, being in the national debates against Obama, and I'm believing it's going to be Romney. But if that happens, if I am the nominee and I'm on the national debate stage with these two guys, I'm going to suggest to you that anything is possible, given that 80% of Americans right now are saying they would consider voting for a third-party candidate. I'm polling at 7% right now against Obama and Romney. I don't know if it's so significant that I'm polling at 7% as much as I'm the third name. But I am the third name.
Yeah.
And I have to point out that I do think that this is very possible. On a lesser level, if the Libertarian candidate for president gets 5% of the general election vote, the Libertarian Party will receive $90 million in federal matching funds for the next cycle, which would be an absolute game changer. Wow. I'd be the first one to sign legislation banning federal matching funds. but this is a system that's been gamed by the two old parties, and this is the game that gets played that allows them to collect hundreds of millions of dollars under this same scenario.
Now, if you bring up the public financing question, if the LP does hit 5% for the public financing in the 2016 election, what do you think they would do with the money? Would the LP take the money, or would they return it? Because that would put the LP in a real difficult spot.
Well, actually, the money would be controlled by the 2016 candidate for president. If I were successful to make that happen this cycle, which, again, I'm hoping to be the nominee, potentially that might happen. If that were to happen, I would want to be the nominee again in 2016, controlling that $90 million, believing it to be an absolute game changer.
So you would use the public financing? It is
a checkoff. I mean, it's something that we look at on our income tax returns, and we choose to make those donations. So it's a little bit different.
So it is somewhat voluntary, is what you're saying.
Yeah, and this is how the system's been gamed. It's gamed, and make no misrepresentation about it. There's a perpetuation of the two-party system in this country, and if libertarians have a chance to crack into that, libertarians have a chance to become one of the major parties. That's my opinion.
Now, there's a perennial debate within libertarian circles about what the role of the Libertarian Party should be. Do you see it more as an electoral force to put people in office, or more as an educational force that can spread the ideas of libertarianism, of free markets, of free minds?
Well, I think, first off, you hit it on the head. I mean, it's always been about information. It's always, here it is. 4 months ago, Gallup comes out with a poll, and 50% of Americans now support legalizing marijuana. What's the reason for that? Well, the reason for it is people are talking about it. And they're talking about it more today than they've ever talked about it before. And when you look back over the 40-year history of the Libertarian Party, arguably, who gets more responsibility for the drug issue and bringing awareness to the drug issue other than the Libertarian Party? So the Libertarian Party has always been a party of ideals, but the Libertarian Party has also always been about fielding candidates for these various elected offices, none of whom win. And I do recognize there are a handful that have, but look, the Libertarian Party's always, I think, been about the truth. I think the Libertarian Party represents people that are fiscally conservative and socially tolerant. I fall in that category. And when people hear what it is libertarians have to say, I think most people identify with libertarians. And so I think there's a real potential here to elect libertarians, and then worst case, libertarians get listened to with regard to all these issues. Hey, the country becomes a better place because we become more informed.
Now, you mentioned Ron Paul earlier. Ron Paul, you endorsed him in 2008. He gobbled up nearly all of this small government libertarian oxygen in the 2012 GO primary, but he can still barely crack 15 to 20% in most states. How are you different from Ron Paul?
Well, first of all, he's a messenger. I'm a messenger. I think this is the biggest growing segment of American politics today, libertarian. And the more people hear the message, the better it resonates. So Ron Paul doesn't have a bogard on communication when it comes to libertarian ideals and beliefs, nor do I. But the more you hear it from different sources, I think the better it resonates. Look, I was hoping to provide stereo speakers to Ron Paul in the Republican debates. I was excluded in a way that I think was really unfair. How do you get into the debates if you're not in the polls that determine who gets in the debates? That's a real catch-22, and it's a way that the system gets manipulated in a way where nobody even notices. So they only wanted one voice up there on stage. Well, when Ron Paul's candidacy goes away, believing that he's not going to be the Republican nominee, where does this message go?
Yeah.
I hope to carry this message forward, and it isn't just me. I think you guys would be doing the same thing if you had the chance.
A huge chunk of his support comes from his positions on the Federal Reserve. Are your thoughts about the Fed similar to his?
Well, what we need when it comes to Federal Reserve policy is transparency. I would abolish the Federal Reserve if given an opportunity, but keep in mind, that's Congress passing legislation that abolishes the Federal Reserve. What does abolishing the Federal Reserve really accomplish? Well, what it really accomplishes is it brings about transparency. What we need to stop doing in this country is printing money. If the Federal Reserve were abolished, we would still be printing money. Treasury would print money just like they printed money before we had a central bank, just like other countries that don't have a central bank print money. So the key here is to slash spending and not have to borrow and print money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar that we spend.
Now, you talked to, how would you, for Paul though, the Federal Reserve thing is such a huge issue. It drives so much of the support for him. In 2008, Bob Barr really hoped to ride the Paul wave. He even hired the same web developers and basically copied the same website but the Paul vote fractured in many different ways in 2008. It didn't go to Barr. It didn't go just to a lot of it went to the hard right with the Constitution Party candidate Chuck Baldwin. How do you attract his supporters?
Well, first of all, I think at the base of Ron Paul's support are people with brains, hearts, and minds, and without telling them or asking them anything, where do they go? I mean, I'll just put it out there. I don't think there's a choice. And I think when you go back to 2008, I think Obama was literally the second coming of the Messiah. And Bob Barr, from my standpoint, really, I'm glad he was a libertarian, but I just personally viewed it as, self-serving, if you will, or trying to take advantage of a situation where I never viewed him as a libertarian, ever. He was kind of always the anti-libertarian. He was anti-civil liberties, not positive civil liberties. So I think really apples and oranges talking about Bob Barr's trying to claim the libertarian mantle when that was something he never was. Now,
you said in an interview with Reason in February, you talked about how you've really made ending the drug war one of the cornerstones of your run. you've also talked about how that doesn't really raise money, and how it's hard to get people who aren't libertarians fired up about shrinking government either. Is there a third cornerstone for you? Is it foreign policy? Is it civil liberties? And in full disclosure, I'm a correspondent for Reason, but is there a no? I have to put that out there. I write for Reason magazine. Is there a third cornerstone for you? Seeing as sort of the drug war, fighting the drug war hasn't worked out, and the small government thing's really a difficult thing to articulate to people. It's just not sexy. I think was the way you. I think that's how you described it. You said it's just not sexy.
Right. Well, let me phrase it in a different way. I think there are three cornerstones to running for president of the United States. One is identifying the problems. Well, okay, so everybody can identify the problems. Secondly, you got to identify the solutions that go along with the problems. I think if you're talking about a presidential race with Obama and Romney and me, I think I'm the only one that's going to be talking about the solutions to the problems that we have. And then lastly, you've got to have a resume to go along with, okay, so you identify the problems, okay, so what? So you identify the solutions that go along with the problems, okay, so what? Do you have a resume to actually suggest that you could actually go out or will go out and doggedly pursue what it is you're talking about? Well, I think I have all three in spades. Now, that's the case that I'm trying to make, and we'll see how it goes. If I were on the debate stage with Obama and Romney, it would be an accurate statement that I do have more executive experience than the two of them combined. And given my background in business, which is I grew a business in New Mexico from a one-person handyman, me, to employ over 1,000 people. Which I got to tell you, there's a real experience I think that goes along with that, and that experience really equates to my having served as governor of New Mexico. Better government, good government in New Mexico when I served as governor was easy. It was easy to look at issues first. And politics last, if even a consideration at all. Meaning, throw politics out the window, look at the issues, try and make the best decisions possible for citizens of the state, not decisions based on politics and who you may or may not upset or make happy with your actions.
Now, you brought the debates a couple times. I know for a lot of third-party candidates, it's always a big deal to get into the presidential debates. It's controlled by this, I think it's the Commission on Presidential Debates. There's only 3 that are held, as unlike the, again, how many debates do we have? 25 Republican presidential something like that, like ridiculous number of debates. I personally would like to. I think it'd be great if there were more than just 3, but. Going to the 3 debates, in the past, third-party candidates, I can't recall exactly if an LP candidate has, but I know presidential third-party candidates in the past have sued to get access to debates. They've been arrested. I know Michael Badnarik was in 2004. I'm pretty sure he was arrested outside one of the debates, protesting not being allowed in. Would you sue that, or do you think they're a private it is technically a private organization? Are they free to include and exclude whoever they want?
Well, they've in that context, the criteria is 15% in the polls to be in the national debate, and Perot established that. So I think he was the last third-party candidate to appear. Yeah,
92
in the national debate. So it's been established, and that was as a result of Perot. So 15%. You could, I suppose, argue that they would exclude my name, and again, I'm hoping to be that name, but they could exclude my name from the polls. But
sure,
you know what? It's hard to try and sweep 15% under the rug and pretend it doesn't exist. If it's there, it'll be there, and it'll be measured.
Now, I know you only have a little bit of time left, but I wanted to ask you about some foreign policy questions. Some libertarians have criticized you for your comments on foreign policy in the Daily Caller this week. So you said you would support using U.S. forces to intervene in Uganda and pursue Joseph Kony. the leader of the Lord's Resistance Army. He's the, if you're not, and for listeners, if you're not familiar, he was the guy that your 14-year-old kid was telling you to watch a video about that was 30 minutes long. It was kind of hard to understand. You also said you support keeping an American military presence in the Middle East, even though you said America doesn't really face any threats anymore. Do you think this is going to hurt you with a lot of libertarians, because you're leaving the door open for foreign intervention around the world, and that's something a lot of libertarians have a real problem with?
Well, and they should have a real problem with it. I'm making three promises running for president of the United States. One is I promise to submit a balanced budget to Congress in the year 2013. I promise to veto any legislation where expenses exceed revenue, and I promise to advocate on the part of throwing out the entire federal tax system and replacing with the fair tax. But in the context of military spending, I'm going to produce a document outlining a 43% reduction in military spending. What's a 43% reduction in military spending look like? Well, that's nuclear warheads from 2,300 to 500. That's our military footprint on the planet. That's all of the conflicts that we're currently involved in. That's the military in uniform. That's the civilian support staff that goes along with them. That's research and development, and that's intelligence. So in that context, answering questions to the Daily Caller, that we should have a presence in the Middle East. Yeah, I think we should have a presence in the Middle East. Now, this is a 43% reduced presence worldwide, but where are the potential military threats? Do they not and by the way, clearly, I hope the Daily Caller article registered the fact that I do not view there being any military threats anywhere on the planet currently, but that we should be vigilant to those military threats. So I don't think we're going to elect anyone that isn't going to say that they're going to be vigilant to potential military threats. And I'm the only one talking about a 43% reduction in military spending, believing that the biggest threat to our national security is the fact that we're borrowing and printing money to the tune of 43 cents out of every dollar we're spending.
You said you wanted to maintain bases in Afghanistan, though, but you said you want to keep a presence in the Middle East. Are there certain places in the Middle East you'd like to leave and certain places you'd like to stay?
No, what I really wanted to make clear in that Daily Caller interview was that look, I'm going to be prudent regarding all this stuff. Are we going to go from the presence that we currently have in Afghanistan to having no presence at all? And by that, I don't mean an occupying force. I don't mean troops on the ground in Afghanistan, but a base in Afghanistan? Potentially, yes.
Potentially.
I mean, this is the statement that I made. I think to make a statement contrary to that, I don't know, you're putting yourself in a box that maybe you can't get out of.
What about Joseph Kony? You said he's one of the worst terrorists in the last 20 years. Do you really think he's worth spending U.S. resources on?
Well, my understanding of Joseph Kony is that, and this group of, my understanding is it's a finite group of about 300 that have arguably been the worst terrorist organization on the planet for the last 20 years, having killed, maimed, raped, murdered tens of thousands of people over the last 20 years. So if I would have signed that legislation that President Obama signed, I'd have been set to go in and deal with that immediately. I would have dealt with it with volunteer forces, as I'm looking at it, and outside of just military advisors. But
nope.
Like I say, my understanding, this is the worst terrorist group that has been on the planet for the last couple of decades.
One last question. This pertains to the local Senate race in Massachusetts. Scott Brown is the incumbent. He was elected in 2010 in a special election, and he is going up against Elizabeth Warren. She's a prominent consumer advocate. She's and railed against Wall Street and the financial industry for a variety of reasons, and for quite a while now. Do you have a particular? There doesn't appear. It doesn't appear likely, based on what I've come across, that there'll be another name on the ballot. I think 8 or 9 people pulled papers, but it doesn't appear that any of them are particularly close to making the deadline. Who would you back in the race if it just comes down to Scott Brown versus Elizabeth Warren in Massachusetts?
I'm not I would not be your source for making that decision. I'll keep in tune as much as possible, and at some point, maybe you guys will have to have me back on, and I'll give you that.
Sure.
Give you.
Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, he's also a Libertarian Party presidential candidate. He will be appearing with the Worcester Tea Party tomorrow in Lincoln Square. That's an all-afternoon event, isn't it? I think it goes till 5.
Yes, I believe so.
And what time are you speaking at?
You know what time I'm speaking at tomorrow? I think it's. I don't right off the top. Yep, 2 seconds, and I'll have it.
Well, if folks do want to go to see Governor Gary Johnson tomorrow, they can go to the Worcester Tea Party events. It's going to be held in Lincoln Square in Worcester.
And I'm on it. I'm on it too.
He'll be speaking at 2. He will not be running in the marathon Monday, although I'll be looking for a bandit runner with a New Mexico logo or something. Governor Gary Johnson, thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it.
All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Take care. That was Governor Gary Johnson. He's former governor of New Mexico, Gary Johnson. My name's Garrett Quinn.